Have you ever wondered how someone's true character reveals itself not in moments of triumph, but in moments of illness and uncertainty? When the lights dim, the applause fades, and what remains is simply the question, who stays and who walks away? I learned the answer the day my doctor looked me in the eye and said the word no one ever wants to hear. Cancer. Stage 2. Aggressive, but treatable. A long road ahead. I nodded, not out of bravery, but out of habit. I had spent years teaching others how to face crisis. I never thought the next crisis would be mine. I stepped outside the hospital, breathing in air that suddenly felt heavier. I called my wife, Sophie, asked if she could come home early. We needed to talk. She replied a minute later, "Busy now? Let's talk tonight." I drove home in silence, rehearsing how I would tell her. Maybe she would cry. Maybe she would hold my hand. Maybe we would fight this together. But when I opened the door, I was met not by tears or comfort, but by absence. Half the closet gone, her suitcase missing. A framed wedding photo removed from the living room wall. And on the kitchen counter, my phone screen lit up with a message. 5 words. This isn't what I signed up for. Below it, a screenshot of our bank account. $0. My name is Dr. Adam Blake. I've spent my life in medicine, in war zones, in classrooms. I've prepared for almost everything, except this. If this story speaks to something you felt but never said aloud, stay with me. What happened next was not rage, not revenge, but something far more powerful. If you've ever been abandoned, underestimated, or erased, I invite you to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for stories that reveal what people are truly made of when everything falls apart. I stood just inside the doorway, keys still in hand, unsure whether I was in the right house or simply no longer part of it. The air was still. Not peaceful, not quiet. Still, like something had been removed. It was the kind of stillness that doesn't invite you to sit down but warns you something sacred has already left. From where I stood, the living room looked unchanged. Her favorite throw blanket still rested over the arm of the couch. The kitchen lights were off, but a faint trace of lavender hung in the air from the diffuser she always used. I walked slowly through the house, trying not to imagine what was missing, but it didn't take imagination. In our bedroom, her side of the closet had been stripped clean. The photo from our 10th anniversary in Florence was gone from the dresser. Her mug from the morning coffee ritual we shared vanished. Even the slippers she left by the door each night had disappeared. It was the absence of these little things, not the big dramatic gestures, that made everything feel so final. I didn't panic. I didn't shout or drop to my knees in disbelief. I just walked to the kitchen counter where my phone buzzed once. A message, 5 words. This isn't what I signed up for. Attached to it was a screenshot of our joint bank account. The balance, 0. Every cent gone. I walked outside and sat on the back deck. The sky was beginning to shift, blue sliding toward dusk. I watched clouds move and listened for sounds that never came. I wasn't waiting for her. I knew she wouldn't return. What I was waiting for was clarity. Not revenge. Not answers. Clarity. And when it came, it wasn't loud or fiery. It was still. The kind of stillness that doesn't break. It sharpens. Sophie had made her move. Not just against me, but against the life we had spent over a decade building. She thought that would be enough. She was wrong, because I hadn't spent a lifetime preparing for chaos just to be destroyed by it. Memory doesn't always return to what hurt you most. Sometimes it lingers where the warmth used to live. Quiet. Moments you thought would last forever. That evening, as the light faded and the silence of Sophie's absence began to settle around me like fog, I found myself drifting not to the betrayal, but to the beginning. Back to when love felt certain. We met in Geneva during an international medical and disaster response summit. I had just stepped off the stage after a presentation on trauma triage in conflict zones. She approached me during the networking reception. Confident, collected and sharper than anyone else in the room. She wasn't impressed by credentials, she was drawn to calm. said I looked like someone who made sense when everything else didn't. It was the first compliment I had taken seriously in years. Sophie was in public relations, working with NGOs and health agencies to shape crisis communications. She believed in control, in image, in strategy. I believed in order born from chaos. We made sense. 6 months later, she moved to Denver. Within a year, we were married, just the two of us in a secluded alpine lodge outside Boulder. Snow framed the ceremony like a movie. She wore no veil. I wore my army dress uniform. It wasn't fancy. It was deliberate. Our life together was built on purpose. We bought a modest home just outside the city, a place with enough space for a garden, a workbench, and the quiet we both claimed to crave. I handled repairs, restored old furniture, built her a reading nook beneath the stairs. She handled the aesthetic, curtains, color palettes, holiday decor. She had an eye for things I couldn't see. I had hands for things she couldn't fix. Those early years we were good. We spent Sundays walking trails, debating philosophy and medicine, mapping out trips we couldn't yet afford. She pushed me to accept a teaching role when I retired from military service. I helped her prep for investor presentations, even when I didn't understand a word of her slides. There was rhythm, there was respect. But over time, the tone shifted. She began comparing. Not directly, never openly, but through questions. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had taken that job with the hospital system in Boston? Or, don't you ever feel like Denver keeps you small? Small? That word sat with me longer than it should have. Her family never fully approved. Her father, a retired CEO who thought every problem had a price tag, once asked me if battlefield medicine was just patchwork or actually scalable. Her mother liked to say I was steady, in the same tone people describe furniture that won't win awards but won't collapse either. Sophie pretended not to mind, but something in her posture changed every time they visited. She dressed sharper. She spoke faster. She pushed me to talk about things I wasn't built to perform, accomplishments, projections, financial plans. Then came the silences. She traveled. More said less. She started sleeping with her phone face down. I noticed, I didn't ask, I told myself marriage goes through seasons. That space wasn't always abandonment. That quiet could still be safe. But I was wrong. She hadn't just drifted away. She had been planning her exit. And I, ever the man who believed in loyalty over instinct, had let her write the ending long before I read the first sign. Hindsight has a cruel precision. It turns whispers into sirens, pauses into patterns. What once felt like noise becomes, in retrospect, a rhythm you ignored for too long. That's what it was like with Sophie. Her retreat wasn't sudden. It was slow, deliberate and expertly disguised as normalcy. At first, it was the business trips. They started innocently enough: 2-day leadership seminars, quarterly strategic offsites, brand alignment retreats. I never questioned them. Sophie was ambitious, and I admired that about her. But then the trips lengthened. A Thursday departure became a Wednesday one. Return flights on Sundays became Mondays. She stopped texting when she landed. When I asked how things were going, her answers turned vague. Busy, same old meetings. Her tone was clipped, her details thin. She began taking calls in other rooms. Her laptop rarely left her side. Even on weekends, when we used to make pancakes and listen to old jazz records, she would drift into the office and shut the door. Just for an hour, she'd say. Sometimes I wouldn't see her again until dinner. When she emerged, her face would be drained, not tired exactly, but elsewhere, as if I was part of an earlier version of her day. Then came the subtle erosion of intimacy, not just physical, but emotional. She no longer asked about my lectures or my patients. I told her a story about a student who had overcome extraordinary odds to finish his clinical rotation, and she smiled politely, nodded, and checked her phone. She used to ask follow-up questions. Now her attention had limits, so I stopped offering stories that mattered. She started making offhand comments that lingered longer than they should have. "You're really comfortable here, aren't you?" she said once, sipping wine on the patio. I mean, Denver's nice, but don't you wonder if we're settling? Another time. You've done so much, Adam. Don't you feel like there's more you could be doing? Her words weren't cruel. They were crafted, careful. But the message was clear. She saw something missing that I didn't. Or worse, she saw it in me. I tried to bridge the gap, suggested we take time off, a road trip, a long weekend away from screens and meetings. She smiled, told me I was sweet, but said things were too hectic right now. Maybe in the spring. Spring never came. The brochure was what changed everything. I found it by accident while loading groceries into her trunk. It was buried under a stack of folders, half folded like a secret that hadn't decided if it wanted to be found. A luxury apartment in San Francisco. Minimalist, ocean views, steps from downtown. I flipped through it. 2 bedrooms, floor to ceiling, windows, high-rise, high-priced, not built for 2. I placed it back exactly where I found it. Didn't mention it, didn't need to. That night we had dinner, pasta. She barely touched hers. Said she wasn't hungry, said she had a headache. Her phone buzzed twice during the meal. She turned it over face down without checking. She said goodnight early and disappeared upstairs. I sat in the kitchen long after she left, staring at her untouched plate. The silence in that room was no longer passive, it was active, and it was telling me something I didn't want to hear. Sophie hadn't just grown distant. She had already begun her exit. She just hadn't told me yet. The day everything changed didn't begin with dread. It began with a routine appointment, a bit of discomfort in my lower abdomen, persistent fatigue I'd chalked up to overwork. I wasn't someone who jumped to conclusions. I'd spent years telling others not to panic, so I followed my own advice, scheduled a checkup, ran the labs, agreed to the scans. 3 days later, I sat in the doctor's office watching the overhead light flicker slightly above my head. The room smelled of antiseptic and quiet tension. Dr. Mitchell came in holding a folder, one he didn't open right, away. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and said my name softly, like preparing me for impact. Adam, he said. It's pancreatic cancer. Stage 2. You caught it early, but we need to move quickly. You'll need a combination of chemotherapy and possible surgery. It's treatable, but this won't be easy. I didn't speak at first, just nodded. I'd counseled patients through worse. I knew the statistics, the protocol, the probabilities. What I didn't know, what I hadn't prepared for, was how the ground beneath you shifts when the word cancer is attached to your own name. It's not fear, not exactly. It's disorientation, like everything you planned suddenly starts ticking down in invisible numbers. On the drive home, the city looked strange, too bright, too noisy. I pulled into a quiet side street, parked beneath a tree, and stared at the dashboard. The first person I thought of calling wasn't my sister or my doctor colleagues. It was Sophie. Not because I believed she'd save me, but because I wanted, foolishly, to believe she still cared. I sent her a message. Can we talk tonight? It's important. She responded a minute later. Busy today, what's up? I hesitated, then typed back, please, just meet me at home. She didn't answer after that. When I got home, the house was dim and quiet. No shoes by the door, no scent of her shampoo trailing down the hallway. I walked into our bedroom and felt it before I saw it. The absence, the finality, the choice. Half the closet was empty, her suitcase gone. The ring box, once kept in the drawer beside the bed, open with nothing inside. In the kitchen, my phone buzzed. One new message. This isn't what I signed up for. Attached was a screenshot of our joint account. Balance. 0. It wasn't cancer that knocked the wind out of me that day. It was that, before I could even say the words out loud, she had already made her decision. She hadn't asked about my condition. She didn't need to know the details. She just knew. I was sick, and that was enough for her to leave. I sat with the message for a long time, not because I didn't know what it meant, but because I knew exactly what it did. Sophie hadn't just walked away. She'd extracted every financial, artery she could reach on her way out. That wasn't grief, that wasn't panic. That was precision, premeditation. But here's the thing no one tells you about surviving war zones, trauma units, and broken systems. You learn how to plan for things other people can't imagine. And while I hadn't predicted this exact moment, I had in a way been preparing for it for years. Long before I met Sophie, I had learned the value of contingency. After my deployment in Kandahar, when a colleague drained our shared medical fund and vanished, I promised myself, never again. I started putting protections in place, not out of paranoia, but principle. Quiet folders, backup accounts, titles, placed in trust. Land purchased in Idaho under a holding company I never named out loud. Documents that looked unremarkable until you realized what they protected. Sophie knew the visible parts of our life. The house, the cars, the shared savings account we used for groceries and vacations. But she didn't know about the equity account I kept tied to my consulting contracts. She didn't know the cabin up north, the one we always joked about retiring, and had never been filed jointly. She had always assumed we were building something together. I let her. I wanted that to be true, until the moment she proved it wasn't. That night, I didn't rage. I didn't drink. I didn't call her and ask why. I opened my old fireproof lockbox, pulled out the folder labeled Active Planning. Inside were passwords, deeds, photocopies, and a checklist I hadn't looked at in years. At the bottom was a note in my handwriting. If everything falls apart, start here. I made 2 phone calls. First, to David Hale, a close friend and financial advisor who had helped me set up the initial protections. He didn't ask questions. "It's time," he said. "It's time," I replied. Second, to Amanda Trask, a lawyer I'd met during a legal ethics seminar at the university. Brilliant, strategic, unflinching. When I explained the situation, she asked just one thing. "Do you have everything documented?" I told her I did. She said, "Then I'll take care of the rest." There was no panic in her voice, no pity, just clarity. And in that moment, that was all I needed. The next morning, while the shock still pulsed beneath my skin, I began gathering everything: bank statements, property records, insurance files, health documentation. I began to create a timeline, not just of my diagnosis, but of her disappearance. Because one day soon, I knew I would need to present not just a story, but evidence. Sophie had believed that illness would weaken me, that I'd be too broken, too distracted, too desperate to fight back. What she didn't understand was that cancer didn't make me fragile. It made me focused. She'd taken everything she could see, but she forgot I'd built most of my life in places she never thought to look. In the days that followed, the house didn't feel empty. It felt recalibrated. There was no more pretending. No more hoping Sophie might walk back through the door with an apology or an explanation. The silence had shape now. And strangely, it felt like relief. But not everything was silent. On the second morning after she left, just as I finished sorting medical documents at the dining table, there was a soft knock on the back door. It was Carl, my neighbor 2 doors down, retired firefighter, widowed 10 years. He held a Tupperware container in one hand and a look on his face that didn't ask questions. "Chili," he said simply. "My daughter made extra." I nodded, took it, and said thank you. We didn't speak about Sophie, we didn't need to. He glanced at the medical folder lying open, then back at me. "Let me know if you need a ride to appointments. I've got time." That was it. He walked away. That's the thing about people who stay. They don't announce themselves, they don't demand a role. They show up quietly, consistently, without conditions. Later that afternoon, I called my sister, Rachel. We hadn't spoken much in the past year. Old disagreements, stubborn pride. But when she answered and heard my voice, she didn't hesitate. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. For the first time, I said it all out loud. Sophie's departure, the money, the cancer. Rachel didn't interrupt, didn't gasp or lecture, just listened. "I'm coming up," she said when I finished. "Tomorrow. Don't argue." She arrived. The next evening with groceries, a notebook full of questions, and that older sister energy that wraps itself around you without permission. She reorganized my fridge, refilled my meds, labeled the folders I hadn't touched yet, and just like that, the house began to feel inhabited again. Not by noise, but by care. Sophie had left the moment things got real. But the people who stayed, they didn't need explanations. They just needed to know where to find me. I had always believed that people reveal who they are under pressure. Some fracture, some rise, but some, like Sophie, reshape pressure into a tool. They don't react, they maneuver. 8 days after she left, a courier delivered a thick envelope from a downtown law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a carefully formatted notice: intent to dissolve the marriage, an opening proposal for division of marital assets, and an outline of what Sophie considered a fair and respectful path forward. The language was polite, sanitized, deceptive. She wanted half the house, access to my retirement accounts, continued use of our second vehicle, and control of the remaining equity from a property we had sold 6 months earlier. There was no mention of the $47,000 she had already taken. No reference to the cancer diagnosis. No acknowledgement of the hospital bills she knew were coming. The letter read like we were simply moving on, like nothing had happened. I didn't respond to her or her lawyer. Instead, I sent the documents to Amanda. She called that evening. "This is good," she said flatly. "Good?" I asked. "It means she's confident," Amanda replied, "and that makes her careless." We got to work. David pulled full banking records going back 18 months. Amanda began mapping out a timeline. I provided receipts, photos, screenshots, and message logs. I hadn't realized just how much I had quietly archived until I needed it. My discipline, once a byproduct of military service, was now becoming the foundation of my defense. Within 2 days, we found the wire transfer. $40,000 moved from our joint account to a new personal account in Sophie's name, executed less than 40 minutes after I had texted her from the parking lot outside the oncology unit. The timing wasn't coincidental, it was clinical. "That's the beginning of our case," Amanda said. "We show she acted with knowledge of your medical condition and deliberately moved funds in anticipation of separation. That's marital misconduct." But it didn't stop there. Another $10,000 had been wired to her parents, labeled under family support. It was odd. Sophie's parents were upper middle class, semi-retired, and owned their home outright. They didn't need support, but they did know how to hide money. Amanda raised an eyebrow. "She's moving assets," she said. "That alone opens her up to a forensic audit, which we can request." Then there were the credit cards. Sophie had quietly opened 2 under her name, listing our shared address, then began making purchases I'd never seen. Flights to California, boutique hotel stays, dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. One of the flights was a one-way to San Francisco. 2 weeks before I was diagnosed, all the pieces were there. Her exit wasn't emotional, it was engineered. Amanda's team compiled a formal response, firm, methodical, and reinforced by hard data. The letter began with a rejection of her terms and ended with a declaration of intent to pursue legal fees, full restitution of misappropriated funds, and discovery of all hidden accounts. Attached was a spreadsheet, detailed, time-stamped, cross-referenced. Amanda handed me a copy before filing. "You're not just reacting, Adam," she said. "You're winning, quietly, legally, and fully." I stared at the paper in my hands, not with satisfaction, but with sobering clarity. Sophie hadn't simply abandoned me. She had tried to dismantle me, assuming the illness would make me weak enough to surrender. But she didn't understand the man she married. She thought the diagnosis would define my limits. What she didn't see coming was the discipline that defined my resilience, the calm beneath the storm, the ability to gather facts while others flailed in emotion. Sophie had launched a financial war, but I had already built a fortress. Sophie thought she had the upper hand, and in fairness, on the surface, she did. She had taken the money first. She had left first. She had lawyers in motion and a head start built on my supposed vulnerability. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that every step she took now was being tracked, logged, and positioned against her. Amanda's strategy was simple. Wait, observe, and feed her just enough misinformation to push her into exposing her own intentions. Sophie was careful, yes, but she was also overconfident. That kind of certainty has weight, and in the right hands, it can be used against itself. It started with a phone call to a realtor I trusted, the same one who had helped me quietly acquire a piece of land upstate 3 years ago. I asked her to put out feelers about listing it publicly. Nothing official, just whispers in the right circles. Then I made a second call to the private investment firm where I held a small old retirement account from my time in the military. I asked basic questions. Early withdrawal penalties, liquidity timelines, what might happen if I needed to cash out due to medical hardship. Within 48 hours, Sophie's lawyer sent a new letter. This time they demanded a detailed breakdown of all assets to ensure a fair share of any pending land sales or retirement account distributions. Amanda read the letter once and smiled. She bit, she said. We tightened the circle. I scheduled a meeting with the bank holding our safe deposit box, the one containing the deed to the Idaho property, the title of the backup vehicle, and an original copy of my living will. That same week, the branch manager called to inform me that someone had attempted to gain access to the box, claiming to be my legal proxy. A woman. When I asked who signed the request, the name didn't surprise me. Margaret Ashcroft, Sophie's mother. Amanda's reaction was immediate. That's not just sneaky, she said. That's fraudulent. Sophie was probing the system, trying to find soft spots, but we were one step ahead. Amanda advised we move everything, documents, assets, accounts to new secured channels. We closed the original safe deposit box and opened a new one under a separate entity I'd quietly created years ago, Havenwell Holdings. I made sure news of the pending sale of the Idaho land reached the right ears, discreetly enough to appear authentic, visible enough to tempt. I even left a mock-up contract unsigned in an unlocked folder near the house, knowing Sophie still had people she could call or lean on for intel. Maybe a friend at the bank, maybe even someone watching my movements. Days later, another letter arrived. Sophie now wanted an emergency order to freeze all potential real estate transactions until the divorce was finalized. Her lawyer cited evidence suggesting the sale of jointly owned properties was underway without consent, but the property had never been joint, and the sale wasn't real. Amanda filed our response that same day, a calm, irrefutable refutation supported by property records, transaction histories, and, most importantly, a written declaration proving the title had been mine alone since the date of purchase. Sophie had lunged at a shadow, and in doing so, she handed us everything we needed. This wasn't luck, this was structure, and her unraveling had just begun. It had been 3 weeks since we'd filed the formal counterclaim. Amanda was moving with precision now, each motion drafted not just with legal clarity, but strategic weight. Sophie's side had stopped trying to appear generous. The tone of their letters turned clipped, defensive. They were beginning to realize this wouldn't be the quiet exit they expected. And then one afternoon, as I was leaving the oncology center after my 3rd round of chemo, I saw him, standing by a silver Range Rover in the far corner of the parking lot, arms folded, sunglasses on. Robert Ashcroft, Sophie's father. He was the kind of man who never asked permission to enter a room. Former CFO of a multinational tech firm, now semi-retired and sitting on 3 boards. I'd never once heard him raise his voice. He didn't have to. His authority wasn't in volume. It was in certainty. He waved me over like this was casual. Like I wasn't walking out of a building pumping toxins into my body just to stay alive. I hesitated, then walked to him slowly, controlled. Adam, he said, tilting his sunglasses down. You look thinner. I nodded once. Side effect of not stealing from people. He smiled at that, small, cold. I was hoping we could speak like men. Men? I repeated. Interesting choice of word. He glanced at the clinic behind me. You're going through something difficult. No one denies that. But dragging this into litigation, it's messy. My daughter wants to resolve this. Amicably. Amicably, I said. After she drained our account and disappeared the day I got diagnosed? She panicked, he replied. People react unpredictably under stress. You know that better than anyone. I stepped closer. She didn't panic, she planned, and she's still planning. What you're doing now, that's part of the plan, isn't it? He straightened his jacket. Adam, be practical. You don't want to spend the next year in courtrooms while recovering. You need peace, not battles. That's when it hit me. They didn't think I was fighting back because I had the strength. They thought I was bluffing, that I'd settle before discovery, that I'd run out of energy, of will. But what they didn't understand was that my strength wasn't rooted in resistance. It was built on preparation. I looked him in the eye and spoke slowly, clearly. You sent your daughter back into a marriage long enough to access my accounts. Then you helped her pull funds before I could even sit down with a second doctor. You tried to cover it through your business accounts, and now you think because I'm losing weight, I'm losing ground. His face didn't move, but the flicker was there. I continued. You've underestimated the one person in this equation who doesn't need to raise his voice to be heard. I'm not asking you to back off. I'm telling you this ends with your daughter returning every cent, and then some. He didn't reply. Instead, he adjusted his cufflinks, nodded like a man acknowledging the inevitable, and said, You've changed. No, I said. I've just stopped pretending you matter. I walked away without looking back. 2 days later, Amanda received an email from Sophie's legal team requesting a mediation session to explore potential early resolution. Amanda called me. They're cracking, she said, and they're starting to realize we're not bluffing. We prepared for the mediation like it was court, filed every document, arranged witness declarations, preserved every timestamp and message. Amanda brought in a financial analyst to present a report estimating the potential damages we could claim if the case proceeded. Over $100,000 in losses, including legal fees, medical disruptions, and misappropriated funds. We walked into the firm's glass-walled office on a Monday morning. Amanda and I on one side of the table, Sophie, her lawyer, and Robert on the other. Sophie looked polished, controlled, but her eyes never met mine. The mediator began. Sophie's lawyer offered a revised settlement. Amanda didn't smile, didn't blink. We're not here to negotiate, she said calmly. We're here to give you a final chance to avoid court. She slid a folder across the table. Inside, our full claim, every document, every detail, every step. Robert opened it, read the first page, closed it. No one spoke for a long time. Then, Amanda said what needed to be said. You thought he was sick enough to stay silent. You forgot he was disciplined enough to survive you. The room went quiet. They knew it was over. But we were just getting started. The mediation ended not with a bang, but with silence. Sophie's lawyer asked for 48 hours to consider our position. Amanda agreed, but she made it clear. There would be no revisions. The terms were final. Full financial restitution. No claim on the house, pension, or land. Sophie would cover all legal fees. In return, we would not pursue charges of marital fraud or asset concealment. They left the room. First, Sophie looked at me only once as she stood. It wasn't anger in her face, it wasn't even guilt. It was something colder. Resignation. Back in Amanda's office, I sat by the window while she debriefed quietly with her team. I wasn't elated. I wasn't even relieved. It felt like watching the last ember of a long-burning fire finally flicker out. There's no celebration in that. Only stillness. 2 days later, the email came through. Sophie's lawyer accepted the terms, unconditionally. Her father would wire the $50,000 restitution within 30 days. She would sign over full rights to the house, the secondary vehicle, and officially withdraw all claims on my retirement assets. The divorce would proceed without contest. Amanda forwarded the email with a simple note. You won. But it didn't feel like winning. Not exactly. It felt like closure that had been earned, not granted. That night, I walked through the house slowly, not to reflect, but to reclaim. I packed up what remained of her things, scarves left in drawers, old birthday cards, a half-burned candle, and placed them in a single box. I didn't burn it, didn't trash it, just stored it in the garage behind the shelves where I kept spare screws and old paint cans, out of sight, out of reach. I checked the mailbox and found a handwritten envelope with no return address. Inside was a card. No words. Just a photo of a beach Sophie once said she wanted to retire on. Folded inside was a single note. Do you ever think about what we could have been? I didn't respond. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. Some exits don't deserve a door left open, and some endings, no matter how bitter, are the only ones that lead to peace. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks after the settlement. I signed the documents in Amanda's office, her assistant sliding each page across the polished mahogany desk like ritual. When it was over, Amanda looked at me, not with congratulation, but with recognition. You carried yourself through this with more control than most men I've seen in 20 years of practice, she said. Most people come in angry. You came in prepared. I nodded, thanked her, and stepped outside into the cold Denver air. For the first time in months, I felt it. Not relief, not triumph. Room. Room to breathe. The chemotherapy ended shortly after. The final session hit me harder than I expected. My body was thinned out, my hair patchy, my joints stiff. But my numbers were improving. The scan showed progress. Dr. Mitchell used the phrase favorable response. He said it with cautious optimism, and I accepted it with quiet gratitude. Rachel came back to stay for another week. She reorganized the pantry, drove me to follow-ups, made sarcastic remarks about the hospital food I secretly liked. She never pushed, never brought up Sophie. Her way of showing love was always through action, not conversation. I had taken that for granted for too long. One night, we sat out back wrapped in blankets, the pine trees black against the stars. She asked, "So what now?" I didn't answer right away. I was still figuring that out. What now? A month later, I sold the house. Too many echoes in the hallways. Too much space where memory lived. I used the proceeds to buy a smaller place near Flathead Lake, Montana. 2 bedrooms, a small garage, a wide front porch, and just enough isolation to feel like peace rather than loneliness. I brought the old motorcycle with me, the one I restored during my first year out of the Army. I'd neglected it during the last few years, blamed time, blamed work. But really, I just hadn't needed it. Now, I did. I spent hours in the garage, hands covered in oil, surrounded by tools and silence. There was healing in that process, rebuilding something mechanical, predictable, honest. Machines don't lie. They don't leave when you're sick. They either work or they don't. But when they break, you fix them. Piece by piece. One morning, as spring crept in and the snow melted off the porch rail, I received another letter. This time the handwriting was familiar. The envelope was unmarked. Inside, a single sentence. I heard you're better. I'm glad. No. Name, no apology, no return address. I folded the letter once, twice, and placed it into the wood stove without a word, watched it curl into ash. That evening I took the motorcycle up the ridge, stopping at the overlook where the lake spread out beneath the mountains. The wind was cold but clean. My hands felt steady on the handlebars. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything, not a diagnosis, not a verdict, not a text that would never come. I was just here, breathing, alive, healing. Not because someone saved me, but because I chose not to be broken. Not every man who's betrayed is broken. Some men, like Dr. Adam Blake, take betrayal and quietly forge something stronger out of it. They don't scream, they don't chase, they don't threaten. They simply switch modes, from trust to strategy, from vulnerability to clarity. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about rebuilding with intention. Sophie believed Adam would collapse under the weight of illness and abandonment. And why wouldn't she? That's what most people expect when they leave you during your darkest hour. But Adam had something far more powerful than hope. He had preparation. And that's what saved him, not just from her, but from the part of himself that could have turned bitter. There's a principle here, deeper than legal tactics or emotional resilience. Strength, real strength, is quiet. It's measured. It doesn't rush to post or prove anything. It plans, it outlasts, it endures. If you've ever been blindsided, by a partner, by a friend, by life itself, remember this. You don't owe anyone a dramatic reaction. You owe yourself a disciplined response. Don't argue with people who decided to misunderstand your value. Don't chase people who made up their mind to disappear. Don't waste your time proving a point when you could be building a future. What Adam did wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast, it wasn't perfect, but it was steady. And in the end, it gave him something his ex-wife could never take away again. Sovereignty. Not just over his assets, but over his peace. So here's the truth. The people who walk away, when you're at your lowest, often think they've left you with nothing, but they forget what kind of man rises from nothing when he's prepared to rebuild from the foundation up. If you're going through something like this, I hope you take that lesson with you. You don't need a crowd to validate your worth. You don't need revenge to prove your strength. You just need to stay calm, stay focused, and remember that silence, when rooted in clarity, is louder than any scream. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you reflect, helped you process, or reminded you of your own quiet power, I invite you to leave a comment below, share your thoughts, or just let someone else know they're not alone in their fight. Your story might be the spark someone else needs. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that don't just entertain, but help you see yourself with sharper eyes. Because sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is to stand still long enough to outlast the storm, and then build something better where the damage once stood.